My mom had sex with my friend. I'm shocked. How can I be friends with him now? I've known Paul for about a decade. We met through our daughters. Olivia and Emma hit it off immediately, and it wasn't long before Paul and I were spending our weekends on the sidelines of soccer fields, sharing the mom, sharing beers at the local barbecues, and lamenting over the frustrations of parenthood. Paul was a firefighter in my mom's town, a job that seemed to embody the kind of bravery and camaraderie I admired. We were more than just friends. We were allies in the chaotic adventure of raising kids. Paul's wife, Amanda, was always a bit of a loose cannon. Her drinking, her wild conspiracy theories, her run-ins with the Lawpol board, all with a weary resignation that made me respect him even more. He was the kind of guy who kept his head down and soldered on. Despite the chaos swirling around him, I'd been a sounding board for him through many a crisis, offering whatever happened. My mom, well, she was a different story. Young at heart, the life of every party, and a doting grandmother to Olivia. She'd gone through a hellish divorce when I was a teenager, a saga that had left deep scars, but also a resilient spirit. She had this on-again, off-again thing with a guy named Bob for the last 10 years, a relationship that seemed more like a familiar habit than a passion for me. We were close, closer than most mother-son duos, partly because she'd been both a parent and a friend to me through some tough times. Last week, over lunch and a couple of glasses of wine, she dropped a bombshell. "Do you have any secrets?" She'd asked me, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint. I'd laughed it off, saying I didn't have any juicy secrets to share, but then she said she had one and wasn't sure if she should tell me. This wasn't the first time she teased me with some mysterious tidbit, and I'd learned to shrug it off. But that day, something made me press her to spill it. "Well, if you really want to know," she'd said, leaning in closer, "Paul came on to me last year." I remember blinking at her, trying to process the words. "Paul, like our Paul, the firefighter Paul, came on to you." "Yeah," she'd said, a little too casually. "Things weren't great with Amanda, and he kind of made a move." I'd felt a weird sensation, like the ground shifting beneath me, but I didn't dwell on it too much at the time. It felt more like a bizarre blip in the otherwise steady rhythm of my life. A few days later, I mentioned it to my best friend, half laughing at the absurdity of it all. Her immediate question, did they sleep together, was like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even considered that possibility. My mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, piecing together bits of conversation and fleeting glances that suddenly seemed loaded with hidden meanings. I called my mom in a panic. "Did you have sex with Paul?" I asked, my voice trembling. Her evasive answers, her insistence on her right to privacy, were as good as a confession. My stomach churned as I realized that the woman who had always been my moral compass, my rock, had crossed a line I couldn't fathom. The next day, I saw Paul at school pick up. My heart pounded as I ducked behind a wall, a cowardly move that felt like the only option at the moment. A living reminder of the secret that was tearing me apart. As the days went by, the enormity of what had happened began to sink in. Paul, my friend, had been intimate with my mom, while still married to Amanda. The thought of it made me nauseous. Every time I saw him, every time I thought of the easy camaraderie we used to share, I felt a wave of anger and betrayal. Our entire friendship now seemed tainted, a series of lies hiding the truth of his actions. I found myself replaying moments in my head, trying to spot the signs I'd missed. The way Paul had always been so eager to help my mom with little tasks, how he'd go out of his way to chat with her when she was around. I'd never thought twice about it. He was just being a good friend, I'd told myself. But now, those moments felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a soccer game that I was dreading. Paul and I had always been side by side on the sidelines, but that day I kept my distance. The tension was palpable. At one point Paul approached me, a tentative smile on his face. "Hey, we need to talk," I said, my voice strained. "Sure," he said, looking slightly worried. "What's up?" I led him away from the crowd, my mind racing with the words I wanted to say. "When we were out of your shot," I turned to him, my eyes burning with anger. "Did you sleep with my mom?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Paul's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Just answer me," I said, my anger bubbling over. "Did you or didn't you?" He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "Yes," he said quietly. "It happened, but I regret it. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I spat. "You betrayed me, Paul. You used me. You used my mom. How could you do that?" He stammered, trying to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. The words felt hollow, excuses meant to justify the unjustifiable. I walked away, leaving him standing there, looking more lost and defeated than I'd ever seen him. The days that followed were a blur of anger and confusion. I tried to keep things normal for Olivia, but every time I saw Paul, every time I thought of my mom, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. I wanted to cut both of them out of my life, But it wasn't that simple. Our lives were to intertwine, our daughters to close. I had to find a way to coexist with Paul, to be civil for the sake of our girls, but it felt like I was living a lie every time I smiled and made small talk. My relationship with my mom also changed. We had always been close, but now there was a distance between us, a rift that I didn't know how to bridge. She tried to reach out, to apologize, but her words felt empty. I couldn't shake the image of her with Paul, the man who had been my friend, the man I trusted. One evening, after putting Olivia to bed, I sat down with a glass of whiskey, trying to numb the ache in my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from Paul. He wanted to meet, to talk things out. I stared at the screen, debating whether to ignore it or face him. Finally, I agreed to meet him at a local bar, a neutral ground where we could talk without the eyes of our daughters watching. When I arrived, Paul was already there, nursing a beer and looking more haggard than I'd ever seen him. "Thanks for coming," he said, as I sat down across from him. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I know I screwed up," he began, his voice cracking. "I know I hurt you, but I want to try to make things right." "How?" I asked, my voice harsh. "How can you possibly make this right?" He took a deep breath, his eyes pleading with me. "I don't know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose our friendship. I don't want to mess up what we have with our daughters." I looked at him, my anger still simmering, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. He was genuinely remorseful, but it didn't erase what he had done. It didn't take away the betrayal I felt. "I don't know if we can go back to the way things were," I said, finally finding my voice. "You broke my trust, and my mom, she's not innocent in this either. I need time to figure out how to deal with this." Paul nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand, I hope we can find a way through this." We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I could see the weight of his guilt, but I couldn't bring myself to offer any comfort. I needed to protect myself, to figure out how to move forward without letting this consume me. In the weeks that followed, I focused on what I could control. I threw myself into coaching the soccer team, channeling my emotions into something productive. I spent more time with Olivia, trying to create happy memories that weren't tainted by the mess unfolding around us. I leaned on my friends, sharing parts of the story, but keeping the most painful details to myself. My interactions with Paul remained civil but distant. We coexisted for the sake of our daughters, but the easy friendship we once had was gone. I missed it, missed the camaraderie and the shared laughs, but I couldn't see a way to rebuild that trust. Maybe someday, we could find a new normal, but for now, the wounds were too fresh. As for my mom, our relationship was strained. I still loved her, but the hurt and betrayal were hard to overlook. I avoided deep conversations with her, not ready to confront the emotion swirling inside me. It was a painful distance, one I hoped time might heal. Life went on, as it always does. There were still soccer games to coach, school events to attend, and playdates to organize. I found solace in the routine, in the small moments of normalcy that reminded me not everything was broken. I learned to compartmentalize my feelings, to focus on the things I could control and let go of the things I couldn't. The situation forced me to reevaluate my relationships, to understand that people are flawed, and sometimes they make choices that hurt us deeply. It wasn't the resolution I wanted, but it was a reality I had to accept. Life doesn't follow a neat script. It's messy and complicated, filled with unexpected twists and turns. In the end, I realized that all I could do was pick up the pieces and move forward, one step at a time. The pain would fade, the anger would dull, and eventually, I would find a way to navigate this new reality. Until then, I focused on being the best father I could be, the best friend I could be, despite the chaos around me, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough.